Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Okay, let's get into it. When you hear the name James Whitey Bulger, your mind probably goes straight to one place.
Oh, absolutely. The ruthless crime boss of the Winter Hill Gang.
Right. The guy who ran South Boston for decades, the FBI informant, the fugitive, the man convicted for his part in 11 murders. That's the story we all know.
That is the public story, yes. But what we're digging into today is something else entirely. A piece of his history that is, well, it's rarely ever discussed.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're looking at sources that reveal this really bizarre and frankly disturbing chapter from his early years. We're talking about the 1950s, long before he was a kingpin.
Well, he was in federal prison.
Exactly. And he becomes an involuntary test subject for the CIA's most infamous mind control program, MKUltra. They were dosing him with LSD.
And you have to understand what that means. This wasn't some minor thing. Stephen Kinzer, who wrote a whole book on this called MKUltra, the most extreme experiments on human beings ever conducted by any agency of the U.S. government.
That's a heavy statement.
It is. He said it left a trail of broken bodies and shattered minds. So putting Bulger inside that context, it changes things. It really does.
So how does a young criminal from Boston end up as, well, a CIA lab rat? Let's trace it back. He was born in 1929, first arrest at age 14. So he started young.
Very young. And then, surprisingly, he joins the Air Force, serves from 48 to 52.
Did he straighten out?
Not really. He had military arrests, but somehow still walked away with an honorable discharge.
Which is pretty wild, but he goes right back to crime.
Immediately. And by 1956, he's hit with major federal charges, armed robbery, truck hijacking. Serious stuff.
And that's what lands him in Atlanta Penitentiary.
That's the start of a 9-year sentence. A sentence that would eventually take him to Alcatraz, starting in '59.
But it's in Atlanta that this whole MKUltra story begins. He volunteers for what he thinks is a medical study.
Right, because there was an incentive. You got 3 days of good time off your sentence for every month you participated.
So a little over a month off per year. For a guy doing a long stretch, that's tempting.
Very tempting. But the deception here is just, it's staggering. He told his associate Kevin, years later, that he and about 18 other inmates were recruited under a total lie.
What was the lie?
They were told they were helping scientists find a cure for schizophrenia.
A cure for schizophrenia? Wow. But the reality was something much darker.
Oh, much darker. This was peak Cold War paranoia. The CIA was terrified that the Soviets and the Chinese had perfected brainwashing.
And MKUltra was their answer.
It was their attempt to mastermind control, chemical interrogation, breaking a person down completely.
The man running this was Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's top chemist.
And Bulger unknowingly just became one of his test subjects.
So what did these tests actually involve?
For about 18 months, starting around 1957, they gave him high doses of LSD and other psychoactive drugs.
18 months.
Continuously. And it was all supervised by medical professionals, like the late Dr. Carl Pfeiffer from Emory University. But this wasn't medicine, this was psychological warfare.
And they were monitoring him the whole time.
Constantly. Technicians would watch him, grill him with questions.
What kind of questions?
He remembered them asking things like, would you ever kill anyone? Really pushing at the boundaries of his psyche, trying to see what would break.
He actually wrote about this later, didn't he?
He did. In his private notebooks, he called the whole thing nightmarish. Said it took him to the depths of insanity.
To the depths of insanity. From a man like Whitey Bulger, that says a lot.
It really does. And his biggest fear wasn't just the drug itself.
What was it?
It was the fear of being seen as insane by the very people driving him there. He developed, in his words, a morbid fear of LSD, believing one more dose would push me over the edge.
He was afraid of being trapped permanently.
Exactly. He wrote that he was terrified to mention hearing voices or seeing the calendar in his cell move because he thought, I'd be committed for life and never see the outside again.
So he's being psychologically tortured, but he can't even report the symptoms for fear of being locked up forever in a mental institution?
It's a perfect trap. After those 18 months, in 1959, they transfer him to Alcatraz.
And what's strange is what he does there.
Right. It's a complete contradiction. He starts reading everything. Poetry, military history, politics. He even takes correspondence courses.
Typing, bookkeeping, business law.
It's like he's trying to rebuild his mind, to impose some kind of order on the chaos they created. He gets out in 1965.
And that brings us to the big question, really. What does this government-sponsored trip to the depths of insanity mean for the man he becomes?
The man who goes on to be convicted of participating in 11 murders.
It's a huge moral and legal question. Did the government help create the monster they later hunted?
Well, one of the jurors from his 2013 trial, a woman named Janet Ular, certainly thought so.
What did she say?
After she found out about the MKUltra tests, she said she would have absolutely held off on the murder charges. She had profound regret.
That's incredible, one of his jurors.
It is. Now, legally, an insanity defense would have been a long shot. A former federal prosecutor said the bar is incredibly high for that. Of course. But he also admitted that the argument, the idea that the government played a role in creating this monster, that could sway a juror or two, it shifts from a legal question to a moral one.
Especially when you remember why he signed up. He thought he was doing something worthwhile for society.
The irony is just crushing. And his relationship with the government doesn't end there. It just gets more and more corrupt.
After he gets out, he rises to the top of the Winter Hill Gang. But his real power came from another government relationship.
His status as an FBI informant, starting in 1974.
He was protected by his handler, John Connolly.
Protected is an understatement. It was collaboration. The FBI used Bulger to take down their main target, the Italian patriarch crime family.
In exchange, Bulger got a free pass.
A free pass to do whatever he wanted. He eliminated rivals, committed murders, all while his handler covered his tracks. It was a complete breakdown of the system.
Until it all came crashing down in 1994.
That's right. The feds were finally building a huge RAO case against him, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
But Connolly tipped him off.
Tipped him off, and Bulger vanished. He went on the run with his girlfriend, Catherine Gregg, for 16 years.
16 years. He was on the FBI's most wanted list, right?
Number 458. At one point, the $2 million reward for his capture was second only to Osama bin Laden's.
They were constantly on the move.
All over. They even took trips down to Mexico for his heart medication. It was surprisingly normal life in a way.
But it couldn't last forever.
It ended in 2011. They finally caught him in Santa Monica, California, living in a quiet apartment complex. He was convicted in 2013, sentenced to 2 life terms.
And his end was just as violent as his life.
Unbelievably so.
Yeah.
In 2018, at age 89, he gets transferred to Hazleton, a federal prison in West Virginia.
A notoriously rough place.
And less than 12 hours after he arrives, he's dead.
Attacked by other inmates.
Beaten to death with a sock-wrapped padlock. The official report said his body was unrecognizable.
A brutal end to a brutal life. But when you look at the full story...
It's not just a story about a mob boss. It's about the intersection of institutional power and criminal action.
First, he's a subject in a secret government mind control program. Then he becomes an asset for a corrupt government agent.
The government first broke him down psychologically. Then it enabled him criminally. And then in the end, it failed to protect him physically in his own prison system.
The lines are just completely blurred, which brings us back to that final thought for you to consider. Thinking about those 18 months of forced LSD exposure, something he said took him to the depths of insanity.
A documented traumatic experience.
Right. So, should the U.S. government bear any moral responsibility for the violent crimes that James Whitey Bulger committed decades later? It's a really challenging question to leave you with.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.